Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Joe Meade with me, too. And, Joe, this video is a Big Ten championship game recap. Final score Indiana 13, Ohio State 10. Indiana does it. They pull off the upset that nobody thought was possible. What were your overarching thoughts on this one?
Yeah, Sean. I was one of the many, I don't want to say detractors of Indiana because I've long established that they're one of the elite teams in college football this year. I just didn't think they could play a complete game. And to be honest with you, Sean, if you told me they'd scored 13 points, I thought this would have went the way, kind of what I predicted, like a 28-13 or 27-13 type of game where they were kind of in it. But they were in it to win it per Coach Cignetti's post-game presser. And the bottom line is Ohio State, what's separated them the last two seasons in college football is they've made the plays when they've had to. This year, it's often been to extend the lead and put the game out of reach for a lot of their opponents. Uh, Last night, Indiana made all the plays they had to. Um, Particularly, they targeted the Jermaine Matthews matchup. I know a lot of Ohio State fans called that out and said it was one matchup, but guess what? They found it, and they found Elijah Surratt for the go-ahead TD when it mattered. Indiana, there were three critical plays. There were three critical fade routes, and they hit every single one um, to take the lead and then to ice the game. So huge credit to Indiana. The probably the elephant in the room to me is the Jaden Fielding missed field goal. I think that is what it is. You could critique Day's decision for the points, but to be fair to Day, Ohio State, the last two games, if I could think of one clear kryptonite now, short yardage hasn't been great. Without a tired down defense like you saw in the second half against Michigan, and the first half against Michigan, you get third and goal from the two. You can't sneak it in. You end up false starting. You take the 3 points. This game, Julian Sand looks like he has it initially. No, knees down, ball short, Indiana ball. That's one thing that if it comes down to that, I see why Ryan Day decided to take the points. I agreed with his decision. Of course, he regrets it now, but I think he knows that's a weakness, and that's not a criticism of Ohio State as a team. But no team is perfect, and I think that's one clear chink in their armor.
Coming into this one, Joe, the teams were essentially, mirrors of each other resume wise and numbers wise. Defense, one was first in one stat and the other was second, and then the other was first and the other was second. And all of the numbers signified that this should have been a statistical tie. And I think it really was, right? Both teams went to the red zone 4 times. Both teams had one turnover. Both teams missed a field goal. It was the QB sneak on 4th and 1 that didn't get there that was the difference. And we can talk about decision making all day, but Indiana came to play, and like we said coming into this one, Joe, Indiana has been there before with serious game pressure this year, and Ohio State hasn't. And when Fernando Mendoza needed to make a throw, he did multiple times. His receivers were not separating all that much. Charlie Becker has had a few great contested catches this season, a few more here. And then probably the surest thing in college football this year, the back shoulder to Elijah Surratt, was the one touchdown that Indiana scored in this one. So coming into this one, all the numbers said it should be close. And from a statistical point, it was really two teams that were going to be separated by a mistake.
I agree, Sean. And to be honest with you, I know the Sayan interception, I think that's kind of wiped off. I know, technically that was the difference, the 3 points there. To be the biggest mistake aside from the field goal was probably Ohio State. I thought they overutilized the run at times. I think they were guilty of what they did against Michigan last year in a sense. I think they could have taken the top off a few times. I think Jeremiah Smith had one of the best games he's had as a Buckeye. I don't know why you don't go back to him on one of those last drives. Even at the end there, he gets that semi Hail Mary. That indicates to me perhaps they could have been holding it back for the playoff. I'm not a big believer they were. I know they were definitely trying to win this game. Um, to be Sean, I think Ohio State has to get it sorted out that they're kind of what they were last year. They have to get ahead early and stay ahead. I think this was a game at halftime. Indiana gets that huge stop before the half. Ohio State's not used to being in those kind of games at halftime. I'm not saying they're incapable of winning them. Clearly, they won Texas and they won Michigan that were one score games at half. But Sean, this is a team that I think has to get ahead early, and that's not an insult. It's just the reality. They play best when other teams are in the pressure cooker in the first half. And Indiana, I never really got that indication that they were.
And the middle eight has been a strength of both these teams this year. Joe, Ohio State haven't had the quickest of starts, and they've usually started to pull away from their inferior opponents in the middle eight. And there's a few times that Indiana has done that as well. But like you said, Ohio State was not all that aggressive with that ball with like what, a minute and change left around midfield. They were not taking their timeouts and they were running the ball. And you could, well, Ohio State was getting the ball after halftime, so they don't want to force an interception or something like that. But, those were the sorts of passive decisions that cost them against Michigan last year. And some of these things happened again this time around. Now, last year I think was purely mental. This year I think there was a team on the other side of them that they couldn't boss around like they could the rest of the league this year. They end up hitting Mendoza on the very first play of the game. In fast motion, it looks like it's okay. I still think it was a late hit, but they were not able to win in the phone booth like they were even just last week at the Big House. Indiana came with the pressure. They held up enough offensively on the offensive line, and they were able to get to Julian Sayin. That's something that we said, if this Indiana team can't get to him, then probably nobody can, because this team leads the country in tackles for loss and sacks. They got a bunch of tackles for loss on handoffs and a bunch of sacks too. They made things uncomfortable enough for Julian Sayin that I think he did have a little bit of trouble reading the defense. And this was, his stats are okay, and obviously boosted by that 50-plus yard reception in the last play that mean nothing. But this was as uncomfortable as he looked all year, and I think other teams are going to be looking at this film and saying that that's how you're going to stop them, right? Because you're not going to stop the wide receivers. You just have to get to him before they get open.
Yeah, and I think kind of the death sentence Ohio State's put on a lot of teams this year is their offensive line can kind of like the Michigan teams from 21 to 23 tire you out. And luckily Indiana was never in that position. You could see Ohio State in that third quarter there, even after the Elijah Surratt go-ahead TD was trying to do that in a way. And to be fair to Ohio State, if they do score a TD there and they get the ball back with lead, they might have been able to tire Indiana's defense out. I think it was more than a fair strategy by Day and Hartline. I know Hartline's catching a lot of flack for the play calling in this game. My theory is Day also has a lot of say there. He's on the headset. He's a very active coach on special teams as well. To say that he's not monitoring the game plan is an asinine statement to me. But Sean, getting off criticism for Ohio State here, I think one thing Indiana also did really well offensively is they picked their spots incredibly well. Kurt Signetti is like, if I had to compare him to, like, I don't know particularly any UFC fighter to compare him to, but in any video game or any action movie fighting, whatever kind of, of that you consume, he's the guy that waits. He's patient. He picks his spots. This idea that he's just some reckless, he does the WWE style promos, and that's what we all know him for and what a lot of people like him for. He is a strategic, I'm not going to say the phrase, but we all know the phrase I'm thinking. And I think maybe his persona is a bit of a myth. I think he's probably more strategic than like a WWE showman, and I think this game put that on full display more so than any game he's coached at Indiana.
Yeah, he's very misunderstood by the national media, and I've sort of figured that out this week. Like, he has his moments where they get clipped and he sort of sounds like a jerk, but he has typically been somebody who's always credited the opponent first, and like even before last week's game against 2-9 Purdue, he maybe, if I don't know if he meant it or not, but he's like, I don't know, understand how this team's 2-9. They look way better, and but in the big moments last year, he did not coach to that hoorah persona that he had, and this year that has changed. He's taken some shots on fourth down, against Iowa. Didn't actually work. 2 fourth down turnover on downs there against Oregon, and again and here, but this defense gave him a real chance, and I don't know, like, I think the offense can play better. They had 13 points after 4 red zone drives. Like, Against most teams, that's 24 points at least. So both defenses I thought played really well. It was Indiana that got over the century mark in rushing yards. It was, 34 attempts for 118, so not the most efficient, but still 3.5 yards per carry. I thought, they did a good job of like getting everything out of some of these runs. Like some of them looked like they weren't going to do much at the line. They pushed forward for two or three, and then 222 in the air for Fernando. And then on the other side, Joe, just 58 rushing yards for Ohio State, about 25 to 30 lost in the sacks. So, just very minor edge there for Indiana. The stats are, it's truly amazing, Joe, how close these things are. 340 total yards for Indiana, 322 for Ohio State. Indiana was 6 of 13 on third down and 1 for 1 on fourth down. Ohio State was 4 of 12 on third and 0 of 1 on fourth down. Um, 5 penalties for 49 yards for Indiana, 2 for 20. Both teams turned it over once. Ohio State had the ball for 30 minutes and 13 seconds, and Indiana for 29 minutes and 47 seconds. So amazingly close across the board here. Indiana missed a field goal. Ohio State missed a field goal. This was as close of a football game as I think you can get in this day and age. But it was Indiana who created enough negative plays. Jeremiah Smith gets 8 for 144, but was under 100 before that meaningless throw there at the end. But Indiana was up for the challenge. A lot of people didn't think they were. And, Joe, I think you were not even close to being the most wrong here about this. People thought they were going to lose this one by 20 plus. And, I don't see, looking forward, there'll be a different video for this, but looking forward, I don't think either one of these teams is going to give up more than 20 points to anybody if they can take care of the ball on offense. Like, both of them had turnovers in their own territory, and it was still 23 total points.
Yeah, and I still want to credit the Ohio State D line too. I think they did an outstanding job outside of the 37-yard run. And even with that, they still averaged like under four when you can't factor in Mendoza. But you take out the Mendoza and the 37-yard run, they held Indiana to less than 3 yards a carry on like 30 plus. So I didn't think Ohio State's defense was any problem. I just think Jermaine Matthews was beat twice by Charlie Becker and
What I
special
don't
teams.
he wasn't even that open on some of them,
Mm-mm.
but
It was just making a play, and I'm not
yeah,
saying he was mossed in any way of getting owned per se, but
he even got his
they
hand
did.
in there one of the times, and
He
it
did.
almost came free. Yeah,
And I think Indiana smartly. I know Igbenusa ended up getting one of the picks, but they stayed away from him.
yeah.
They didn't get greedy, and that's this idea with Indiana. I know they run up scores. I know they cover spreads. I don't think they're necessarily a greedy football team, though. That this idea around and I know some of our like shorts have been viewed a little more. And if this gets clipped, here's what I'm going to tell you. Indiana is calculated. Indiana's not the drunk bar guy, like throwing fists, doing roundhouse, and just connecting because he's a drunk, big, strong ex-fighter, ex-boxer, whatever, the type. Uh, they're as cerebral as they are physical.
And Joe, like they have continued to score, but it's sort of a mentality of this team to play every single play like it's nothing. And
Mhm.
like Mendoza comes out of these games for his brother in like the middle of the third quarter, and then they just run it 8 times in a row down the field and score another touchdown. Like they play every play like it's 0-0. They're not throwing four verticals in the fourth quarter when they're up by 30. It's just they continue to score and be methodical with it. But Ohio State does fall here. Joe, do you think that there's sort of a Michigan wake up call from last year coming here? Like they sort of blew everybody out and were deserved winners of the national championship last year. Do you think that this game could get that sort of reaction?
Um, Probably not in the sense that this was not a meaningless title game, but that Michigan loss, for everyone who knows, was a lot more damaging at the time than this loss. Like in reality, they just lost to the number one team in a back and forth game. In a game, let's face it, where Indiana had somewhat a home field advantage. So, from that sense, no, I don't think Ohio State's going to play this way and lose to many other teams in the country. So I think it's a wake up call, but I don't think it's like a fire under their you know what's, for lack of a better term. I think it's more we got to adjust some things and off to the races. But I think this is a mature enough group. This is a lot of the guys, Jeremiah Smith, Cardell Tate, Caleb Downs, a lot of the guys who lead the defense were starters on last year's national title team. I think this is going to be viewed a lot more as an NFL type loss than necessarily a loss to their biggest rival.
Yeah, it doesn't really change much for them in terms they've dropped to the 2 seed in the college football playoff. A little bit surprising there, but I think it is good that it is set up for these two to meet no earlier than the title game. Obviously, they both got to get there, and you know probably won't happen if we're being honest. But this, I think if Ohio State plays like this, which is probably their B to C effort, then they're probably beating 9 of the 12 playoff teams. Maybe Georgia can beat them. Maybe Texas Tech. But after that, Joe, I think it's going to take like ridiculously good efforts to beat either one of these football teams. It just it just seems like the very few mistakes that they make, you know, they put themselves in good enough positions to overcome them.
Yeah, and you said something about the number 20 in terms of the defenses. I think it's
Yeah.
also with the offenses. I think the only way you beat these teams is if you keep them under 20 as well. I mean, obviously, with your statement, that makes total sense, but keeping these teams under 20 is no small task.
Yeah, and like in terms of actually moving the ball here, it wasn't like it seemed like there would be if you took the scoring plays out of this game and just showed the drives until the scoring play, like you would have thought this game would probably be a total of 40 points. Like 4 red zone drives each. You think, all right, well, they both score 2 touchdowns and then probably 3 field goals and
And then someone hits
a
a chunk
turnover.
play somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, so like this game was low scoring, but like teams were moving it all right. Like there were very few 3 and outs. There were, you know, a couple of one turnover on downs in the red zone, and it just the margins are really fine. And I think Indiana just got them today. But Joe, let's wrap this video up with the impact that this game is going to have on the Big Ten and Indiana University specifically. This is their first Big Ten title since 1967. Even that was like not an outright title because they didn't have a championship game. But what an incredible change of circumstance for this football program and this university in the last 2 years. They have gone from the worst team in the history of college football to the Big Ten Conference champion in just about 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most impressive collegiate turnaround, especially in this sport. And I want to not like minimize this. I think when people view Indiana, a lot of local talk around here by Michigan State people are, oh, if Indiana could do it, no, 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 no. That's a
Yeah,
ridiculous
it's
expectation.
not
Like
fair for
the
these new
the fact
coaches.
that this could be normalized is pretty ridiculous, and that's a huge compliment to Signetti, the athletic director, the president uh, of Indiana, because to think this could be replicated like it's some video game is pretty ridiculous, and it's frankly if you're any logical person that works in collegiate athletics and you think this is the norm, I genuinely am left speechless.
And Joe, on the other hand, while I agree with that, these ads could have hired Kurt Signetti. He's been around for quite a long time. He's paid his dues at Alabama as the recruiting coordinator. Then he went to D2. He did well at Elon. He did well at James Madison. Like the reason why he took the Indiana job is because it was the first power program that gave him a shot. And he comes in here, he changes the way people think, and their only 2 losses in 2 years now have been to the Ohio State Buckeyes on the road, who ended up winning the national championship, and Notre Dame on the road, who ended up losing to that Ohio State team in the national championship. So I know the season's not over yet, Joe, and we're going to get into the matchups in the college football playoff. Obviously, these two teams don't know who they're playing yet. It'll be the winner of the first round games. But what a tremendous season for Indiana, and no matter what happens now, the banner will be on the wall, which is something that is not very familiar to Indiana football. And then in terms of Ohio State too, They are very close. Their chances of winning the national title, in my opinion, have not really changed
No.
in the past day or two. So, Joe, we're going to wrap up the video here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and be sure to check out some of our game previews and recaps upcoming in the college football playoff.